adults today expect their children to have a higher standard of living than theirs, and more than a quarter say it will be lower. For many Americans, the Great Recession has been the sharpest trauma since the Second World War, wiping out jobs, wealth, and hope itself. Think that over for a moment. For millions of garden variety Americans, the audacity of hope has been replaced by impulsivity. So I have
also visit us at
confession. Legendary correspondent Evelyn told his generation journalist that I have something as long as
para continuar en español.
here's
Oprima
mine.
2. For questions about your economic impact payment, also known as stimulus payment, press 7. For questions about your advanced child tax credit, press 8. For questions about your refund, or to check the status of your Form 1040X amended tax return, press 1. For answers about your personal income taxes, the federal form law, or calculating your income tax withholding, or to order a tax form or publication, or a tax
Democratic
transcript,
checks
press
and balance.
2. For answers about your business taxes, press 3. To hear general pre-recorded information and resources available to you about the healthcare law, including how it may affect individuals, families, and employers, press 4. For answers about your personal or business taxes as it relates to healthcare, press 5. For answers to frequently asked questions, notice clarification, or to make a one-time payment, press 6. To repeat this menu, press 9.
Which we hope and pray will be translated into legislative and executive action by our conservative representatives.
You must make a selection from the following
Voting
options.
is the beginning of the
You
conversion
must make a
process.
selection from the following
The
options.
focus of real power is always elsewhere. Voters still, quote, matter of course, but only as raw material to be shaped by the actual form of political influence, which is money. The article was an excerpt from Hodge's new book, which I also highly recommend to you, called The Mendacity of Hope. In it, he revisits our founding generation's concern over the corruption that occurs when the private ends of a narrow faction succeed in capturing the engines of democracy. This kind of corruption consumed the republic. James Madison and his contemporaries, many of them, knew this. They viewed history through a tragic lens. They thought the life cycle of republics, the degeneration into anarchy, oligarchy, or monarchy was inescapable. And they attempted to correct safeguards against it, hoping to prevent private and narrow personal interest from overriding those of the general public. They failed. Nearly a century had passed after those ringing propositions of 1776, when America was engulfed in the gross materialism and political corruption of the first Gilded Age, as big money bought the government right out from under the voters. Privilege controlled politics, and the purchase of votes, the corruption of election officials, the bribing of legislatures, the lobbying of special bills, and the flagrant disregard of laws threatened the very foundations of the 100-year-old experiment in self-government. Now then, it will not surprise you, I'm sure, that this degenerate and unlovely age, as one historian called it, served to inspire Karl Rove, the man who was said to be George W. Bush's brain, and now a mover and shaker of the money tree for the corporate conservative complex. More on that a little later. The extraordinary coupling of private and political power toward the close of the 19th century, that first Gilded Age, captured Rove's attention as a younger man, especially the role of Mark Hanna, the Ohio entrepreneur who became the first modern political fundraiser. There are two things that are important in politics, Mark Hanna said. The first is money. I can't remember the second. He didn't need to. Hanna shook down the banks, the insurance companies, the railroads, and the the Evelyn Industrial Trust in the late 1800s for all the money it took to make William McKinley governor of Ohio and then president of the United States. McKinley was the perfect candidate, conduit for their largesse. He was one of those politicians with a talent for emitting banalities as though they were recently discovered truths. His opponent in the 1896 election was the Democratic populist candidate William Jennings Bryan, whose base, as the name goes, consisted of aroused populists fighting to tame the rapacious theft of the public trust by the monopolists, the trusts, and the corporations that were running roughshod over the new country. Bryan was obviously a threat to those economic interests, and he succeeded only in raising 1/10 of the money that Mark Hanna raised for McKinley. And we know who won. Money in politics is a no story. Carl Rove studied Hanna.
This don't look right at all. Not at all, honey.
Hanna believed the state of Ohio existed for property. It had no other function. Great wealth was to be gained from monopoly through using the state for private ends. It was axiomatic, therefore, that businessmen should run the government and run it for personal profits. He and McKinley therefore saw to it that first Ohio and then Washington ruled by bankers, railroads, and public utility corporations. The United States was famous, as you know, as a millionaire's club. City halls, state houses, even courtrooms were bought and sold like baubles. And instead of enforcing the rules of fair play, which is what government is all about, government began to serve as the valet of the super rich. The young journalist Henry George, a hero of mine, wrote that an immense wedge being forced through American society by the maldistribution of wealth, status, and opportunity. The historian Tim Bosier described this era as the great robbery of American intellectual history. Conservatives of the day, pro-corporate apologists, hijacked the vocabulary of Jefferson liberalism and turned words like progress, opportunity, and individualism into tools for making the plunder of America sound like divine right. Laissez-faire ideologues and neocons of the day, lovers of empire even then, hijacked Charles Darwin's theory of evolution and so distorted it that politicians, judges, and publicists gleefully embraced the notion that progress emerges from the elimination of the weak and the survival of the fittest.
What
One
up?
of the plutocrats in New York crows, we are rich. We own America. We got it. God knows how, but we intend to keep it. That has been
What
the
up?
fundamental conflict of life and struggle in American life, in American politics, in democracy for over 150 years now. And the Gilded Age has returned with a vengeance. It slipped in quietly at first, back in the early 1980s when Ronald Reagan began a massive, decades-long transfer of national wealth to the rich. Roger Hope says under Bill Clinton, the transfer was even more dramatic as the top 10% captured an ever-growing share of national income. The trend, of course, continued under George W. Bush. Remember the tax cuts for the very wealthy? In about 2007, the wealthiest 10% of Americans 50% of the national income. And today, a fraction of people at the top earn more than the 120 million Americans at the bottom. A fraction of the people at the top, less than 1%, today earn more than the bottom 120 million Americans. You will hear it said, well, Warriors, this is the way the world works. No, it's the way the world is made to work. This vast inequality, this huge gulf that separates the two Americas is not the result of Adam Smith's invisible hand. It did not just happen. It was no accident. It was the result of a long series of public policy decisions about industry and trade, taxation and military spending by flesh and blood human beings like you sitting in concrete and steel buildings. And those policy decisions were paid for by the less than 1% of our population who participate in democratic capitalism through campaign contributions. So over the last 30 years, with the complicity of both political parties, the plutocrats, or the plutonists, choose your own poison, have used their vastly increased wealth to assure that government does their bidding. Remember that reference in this document to the market-friendly government on the side of plutonomy? Calls to mind the story I heard growing up in Texas about the poker game in which the dealer says, "Now play the cards fairly, Reuben. I know what I dealt you." And that's what's been happening. It all seems so clear that we wonder how we could have ignored the warning signs at the moment. One of the few journalists who was prophetic, Thomas Edison of the Washington Post, now the Columbia journalist, reported that, quote, business has refined its ability to act as a class, submerging competitive instincts in favor of joint cooperative action in the legislative arena. Big business political action committees flooded that political arena with a deluge of dollars. They funded think tanks that churned out studies results skewing to their ideology and interest. And they cleverly built alliances with the religious right, Jerry Falwell's Moral Majority, and Pat Robertson's Christian Coalition, who zealously waged a cultural holy war that camouflaged the economic assault on working people in the middle class. Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan also tried to warn us. He said President Reagan's real strategy was to force the government to cut domestic social services by fostering federal deficits of historic dimensions. Moynihan was gone. And that's the reason that a third of the fourth generation watch that fulfill dream. The plutocrats who soaked up all that money that we've been talking about now say that the deficits stretching into the future require putting Social Security and other public services on the chopping block. Mr. Bush said last week, only last week, that his biggest regret of his 8 years in the presidency was not invading Iraq with false premises and costing over $1 trillion or more, but his failure to privatize Social Security. With over 100 incumbent Republicans in the House having signed the pledge to do just that when the new Congress convenes in January, Mr. Bush's dream, like Ronald Reagan's dream, may yet be realized. Daniel Altman also saw what's coming. I recommend to you his book, Neo-Economy, in which he described a place without taxes or a social safety net, where rich and poor people live in different financial worlds. It's coming to America 15 years ago. Not sure even he foreseen then that firefighters in rural Tennessee would let a home burn to the ground because the owner couldn't pay a fee of $75. So the beat goes on. And here we are on the verge of the biggest commercial transaction in the history of American elections. Nearly $4 billion is being spent on the congressional races that will be decided next week. Much of that money, as you've heard, as we know, is coming from secret slush funds, almost impossible to trace. The organization Public Citizen reports that just 10 groups are responsible for the bulk of spending by independent organizations. Quote, a tiny number of organizations relying on a tiny number of corporate and fat cat contributors are spending most of the money on the vicious attack ads dominating the airwaves. Those are the words of Public Citizen's president, Mark Weissman. The Federal Election Committee said a few days ago that 2 years ago, 97% of groups paying for these election ads disclosed the names of their donors. 97%. This year, 32%. Donors are laundering their cash with front groups like highfalutin names like American Crossroads. That's one of the two slush funds controlled by Carl Rove, Conservative groups in the Chamber of Commerce have in fact created a shadow party determined to be the real power of Washington, just like Rome, Opus Dei, then Rome to the Vinci Code. In this shadow party of plutocrats running, we have reached what the new chairman of Common Cause and former Labor Secretary Robert Reich, known to so many of you, called the perfect storm that threatens American democracy. An unprecedented concentration of income and wealth at the top. A record amount of secret money flooding our democracy, and a public becoming increasingly angry and cynical about a government that's raising its taxes, reducing its services, and unable to get it back to work. We are losing our democracy to a different system, says Bob Reich. It's called plutocracy. That word again, but he's right. That fraction of 1% of Americans who now earn as much as the 120 Americans at the bottom, including top executives of major corporations, Wall Street hedge fund and private equity operators, constitute Citigroup autonomy, and they're buying our democracy, and they're buying it secretly. That's because early this year, the 5 reactionary members of the Supreme Court ruled that corporations are persons with the right to speak during elections by funding ads like those now flooding the airways. Now, it's hard for patriots like you to know, to admit it. Hard for me to admit it. But the United States Supreme Court has promulgated a law. Corporations are not people. They're legal fictions. Creatures of the state, born not of the womb, not of flesh and blood, but of the imagination of fabulists. They're not permitted to vote. They don't bear arms, except that now they can drop a nuclear bomb on the congressional campaign and nobody will know where it came from. Yet 5 men in black robes have bestowed on corporations the privilege of personhood to speak, and not in their own voice, mind you, but as ventriloquists using their money to hire their puppets. Do they really think that that's what the authors of the First Amendment intended? Horrified by this perversion of the First Amendment, the editor of the spunky Texas Observer, Bob Bosier, got it right with this headline: "So long, democracy." Good. I said that this was a work of fabulous. You remember that soon after the court's decision, President Obama raised the matter during his State of the Union speech in January. He said the decision would unleash a torrent of corrupting corporate money into our political system. Sitting a few feet in front of the president, about where you are, Associate Justice Samuel Alito defiantly mouthed the words, "Not true, not true, not true." It was a remarkable revelation of the majority's mindset. Alito was either disingenuous, naive, or deluded. He cannot be in this world without knowing he and his fellow corporatists were giving big donors the one thing they must most want in their campaign against working people: an unfair advantage. Alan Grayson lives in the real world. He's a member of Congress. Here's what he said: "We're now in a situation where a lobbyist can walk into my office and say, 'I've got $5 million to spend. I can spend it for you or against you. Which will it be?'" My friend and colleague Michael Winchell, columnist, told a story this week to illuminate the Supreme Court's coup de grace against democracy. It seems incorrigible George Bernard Shaw once propositioned a fellow dinner guest, asking if she would go to bed with him for £1 million. It's about $1.5 million in today's terms. She agreed. Shaw then asked her if she would do the same for 10 shillings. "What do you take me for?" she asked angrily. "A prostitute?" Shaw responded, "We've established that principle. Now we're just haggling over the price. With this one decision, seriously, this one decision, the Supreme Court established once and for all that Shaw's is the only principle left in politics. Long price. So go with me to Washington's red light district. We call on the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, the front group of the hypocrisies prosecution. The Chamber boasts that it represents more than 3 million businesses and approximately 300,000 businesses. Actually, it has almost nothing to do with the shops and stores along the street here around Boston. In the words of the economics journalist Zach Carter, the chairman's branding allows them to disguise their political agenda as a coalition of local businesses while it does the dirty work for corporate titans. Carter says that when the Supreme Court decision came down with its infamous ruling earlier this year, the Chamber responded knowing it was going to get secret money by announcing a 40% increase in its political operation. After the money started flowing in, the Chamber boosted its budget again by 50%. According to a recent investigative report in the New York Times earlier this week, nearly half of the Chamber's funding, even before the Supreme Court decision, came from just 45.
Oh, too close.
And contribution coincided with lobbying or political campaigns that potentially affected the donors. Times concluded that the Chamber has increasingly relied on a relatively small
They always use the same
collection of
actor.
corporate donors. Hypocrisy senior ranks finance much of its legislative agenda. And if you wonder where the restraints of democracy have gone, if you wonder what's happened to the checks and balances that are supposed to hold amoral capitalism in some check and responsible to the body politic, to the public welfare, there's your answer. Furthermore, the New York Times story said the Chamber makes no apologies for its policy of not identifying its donors. It has vigorously opposed legislation in Congress that would require groups like it to identify their biggest contributors when they spend money on campaign ads. Now, let's quickly connect the dots. When the House of Representatives recently passed a bill, that would require that the names of all such donors be publicly disclosed, every Republican in the Senate opposed it. And there it died. And smiling. Because that's the only smiling is the only response to hypocrisy. Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell had actually claimed that the Sunshine Laws would make everything okay by letting people see who was buying their election. Well, no sooner did the public start singing "Let the Sunshine In," McConnell lined up every Republican in the Senate to black out the windows. When the chief lobbyist for the Chamber of Commerce was asked by an interviewer, "Are you guys eventually going to disclose?" the answer was a crisp no. So they will not reveal the corporate sources of their slush funds, said to be $75 billion or more, because those corporations are afraid of a backlash from people like you. Doesn't that tell you something about the nature of what we're doing? It reminds me of those words of a character in Tom Stopper's play, Night and Day. People do terrible things to each other, but it's worse in places where everything is kept in the dark. That's true in politics. So it turns out, it won't surprise you, that many of these ads paid for secretly by anonymous donors are, quote, false, grossly misleading, or marred with distortions, as Greg Sargent reports in his website, The Plumline. Go there, plumline.org, and you'll see a partial list of ads that illustrate the scope of the intellectual and political fraud being perpetrated in front of our eyes. Money from secret sources is poisoning the public mind with toxic misinformation in order to dupe voters into giving even more power to the powerful. On another site, in progress, you can find out what you need to know about the multi-billionaire Koch brothers, also big oil polluters and producers, and Tea Party supporters. They're recruiting captains of industry to fund the right-wing infrastructure of front groups, political campaigns, think tanks, and media outlets. And among the right showed up at one of these secret network meetings of Republican donors were two Supreme Court justices, right-wingers Antonin Scalia and Clarence Thomas. I said you can't make this up. Listen, 2 of the 5 votes for corporate slush funds
6-digit
on
code.
the Supreme Court of the United States came from justices who were present as members of the plutocracy scheme to take over government. Now then, something else is going on here. The Koch brothers have contributed significantly to efforts to stop the Affordable Care Act, the health care reforms, from taking effect. Justice Clarence Thomas's wife, Virginia, claims those reforms are unconstitutional and she's organized to repeal them. She's leading a movement to repeal them.
Thank you, Lord Jesus. Oh my God.
And there's more. Virginia Thomas founded an organization based at Jerry Falwell's University to kill.
Lord have mercy, Jesus.
Also a goal, by the way, of the Koch brothers. Her organization got started with $500,000 from an unnamed donor and is now funded by secret contributions from sources whose identity we journalists can know and you, voting public, will never know. Is it conceivable that some of those donors are corporations that stand to benefit from favorable decisions by the Supreme Court? This truly bothers me. It's what I can't figure out about the conservative mindset. The Kochs, I can understand. SCN and Daddy Warbucks, who can't imagine what life is like for people who don't make $21 billion per year. But whatever happened to this passionate conservatism? I mean, the Affordable Care Act, whatever its flaws, and it has flaws, extends health care
Not right
to
now.
over 40 million deprived Americans who would not otherwise be covered. What is it about these people, the Clarence and Virginia Thomases, the secret,
Damn it.
the privileged plutocrats,
They won't let me pay the balance in full. That's what I want to do.
a little social justice where it counts among
Okay,
everyday people
pay
struggling to get by.
balance in full, unavailable, pay towards your plan, amended return, proposed tax assessment. Okay, I have, what is my bill amount?
Why wouldn't you want people who are
It
less
is.
fortunate to have a little security? She works for the university and identifies itself as Christian.
Don't give me an amount there.
How come she's only about live and let live? Is there no space in her faith for the mustard seed of the gospel message?
I love these Hindu
and
movies.
help live? Why would this cushioned crowd
Okay,
resort to such
14,
despicable
17,
tactics,
60.
using secret money to try to turn public policy against their less fortunate neighbors, and in the process compromise the already tattered integrity of the United States?
14.
I don't
Where
get
was
it.
that?
You be the judge, because if you don't, Clarence Thomas will. Time closes. Friend Robert Rice reminded us in a recent essay that millions of Americans are in trouble. They've lost, as I said, their jobs, their homes.
They be tripping, man. I swear to God.
State and local taxes are rising.
14.
Firefighters are being laid off. Roads and
14.
bridges they count on are crumbling.
It's less. Get the hell out of here.
And private libraries are being shut.
It's less than what's on my paperwork. Let me make a change.
Until we get clean money, we're not going to get clean elections. And until we get clean elections, you can kiss government of, by, and for the people. Welcome to
706.
the democracy.
Wait.
Obviously, Howard.
Is that right?
Never
1412.
Look at this headline above one of his essays published posthumously this fall by the Progressive magazine.
87.
Don't despair about the Supreme Court.
So I'm going to do 706 and 45.
The ones were lost long ago, he said. Don't go there looking for justice. Wrote the Constitution Constitution gave no rights to working people, no right to work less than 12 hours a day, no right to a living wage, no right to safe working conditions. Workers had to organize, go on strike, define the law, the courts, the police, create a great movement which won the 8-hour day and caused such commotion that Congress was forced to pass minimum wage laws and social security and unemployment insurance. Those rights only come alive when citizens organize, protest, demonstrate, strike, boycott, rebel, and violate the law in order to uphold justice.
Okay.
I want to show you what I mean. Howard came on my show last December, and I've got this thanks to my executive producer, Sally Roy, who's sitting there with her great son and daughter, her husband, Peter. Howard came on my show last December to talk about the documentary he and Ned Damon and Josh Brolin produced, The Hidden Chapter. They used actors to speak the actual words that Howard, of people that Howard had written about in his own books. They called it The People Speak. And here's one of my favorite moments in my interview with Howard about it. Bring the lights down and bring the screen down, and I'll be right back to wrap this up very quickly. Watch this.
I need to go by.
That's Howard Zinn, as I always remember. When he was talking, he had a tear in his eye. And I realized sitting there across from him, it was a tear for courage. It was a tear for the truth. And it was a tear for democracy. Because by speaking truth courageously, people throughout American history.
There we go. That's what I need. Perfect.
Their rights.
Okay.
And for we.
So I need that one.
What can we do? I can almost hear Howard throwing that question back, and it's not gone on longer than I should have. I'll stay as long as you want to deal with your question. I can hear him asking us, what are we going to do? Organize. Yes, organize. And don't count the cost, is what he used to tell a lot of young people.
Oh, I see.
That many people already are.
Control.
There's a problem in the land.
Mm-hmm.
The corporate media, and I don't mean a tea party. The corporate media may not pick it up, but despite the odds, folks are organizing on various fronts against big money in politics and the secrecy that surrounds it.
Okay.
Veteran interest groups like those I already mentioned, Common Cause and Public Citizen are aroused. There are the rising voices from web-based initiatives such as freespeechpeople.org to grassroots initiatives such as Democracy Matters on campuses across the country, including an active chapter here on BU, I'm pleased to say. MoveOn.org is looking for 1 million people to fight back against the Supreme Court decision in a variety of ways. But let me be very clear with you. By taking on big money, we're talking about something more than a single interest issue. What Howard would ask us to think about is not so much a progressive revival.
Wilmington, North Carolina, special weather. Okay. Next. 745. Yes, that is correct.
It's been done before. It could be done again. There's plenty of outrage to ignite it. Democrats, disillusioned Republicans, independents, Greens, even some of the Tea Partiers who, when they wake up and realize they've been sucker punched by the very people who are bankrolling them, are going to be mad as hell. You know, and I say this as a broad-based coalition because if you're fighting for a living wage, or peace, or immigration reform, or gender equality, or the environment, or safe neighborhood, you are a necessity opposed to a handful of moneyed interests controlling how decisions get made and policy is set. We have to be smart about the nuts and bolts of building a coalition. Remember that it has to do a lot with human nature. Some, as Howard
Save a stamp or two.
Some will want to petition, some will want to engage with the web. Many have the same spirit, a fighting spirit. Because as Howard would say, no fight, no fun, no results. What you got to realize is that you're not alone in this. All across the spectrum, to escalate the power of money. Public security is a cue to this issue of fair play. A pop's favorite big money at the expense of the little guy, at the expense of the country they love. My friend, the legendary community organizer, Coletha, talks about the power to preserve what we value.
Okay.
That's what this movement is all about. The power to preserve what we value, both for ourselves and on behalf of democracy. But hear me on this. Frederick Douglass was right. Power concedes nothing without a struggle. Even the most
I've heard that
on our
several
side,
times.
beyond the law. Money fights hard and it fights dirty. The big road, the chamber, the coast. We can lose. It all may be impossible. It's okay if it's impossible. Heard me right. I've learned something about this from the farm worker and now labor organizer Valdema Velasquez. Members of his farm labor organizing committee are a long way from the streets lobby. They took on the Campbell Soup Company and won. They took on North Carolina growers and won. They took on, and by the way, they used transnational organizing techniques. They won, a Genius Award from the MacArthur Foundation. And now they're taking on Reynolds Tobacco and one of its principal financial sponsors, J.P. Morgan Chase, whose head is a good friend of Barack Obama. Now, some people have questioned the wisdom of taking on such powerful interests, but here's what Velasquez says. It's okay if it's impossible. It's okay. Now he says, I'm going to speak to you as organizers. Listen carefully. The object is not to win. That's not the objective. The objective is to do the good and right thing. If you decide not to do anything, or it's too hard and too impossible, then nothing will be done. And when you're on your deathbed, you're going to say, I wish I had done something. If you go and do the right thing now, long enough, he said, good things will happen. Something will happen. Shake.
Being scary. I didn't realize that. I'm sorry. And if you will keep your questions as brief as you can, I'll make my answers as brief as I can. Although, there's certain liberation that comes from being out on television, there's no limit to your time.
You've described how many of the organs of information resonating on opposite disinformation. One of the things I see when I watch Fox News is something that I part of 1984 that I disbelieved at the time was the 2-minute tape where it helped the populace to have 2 minutes patience.
Okay.
Extending his hand in bipartisanship gesture, but they kept knocking it away.
Mhm.
I think it's very hard when there is a political party whose platform is no to everything. And it's very hard with Fox News that is the arm of the Republican propaganda machine. We've never had that before. We always had a partisan press. We had 1,000 independent presses in this country in 1840. And some of them were very partisan. In fact, it was partisan press arguing with each other all the time. That enabled people to try to make judgments about who's telling the truth. But we haven't had 24/7 round-the-clock partisan propaganda from a major network like that. And there was a study out last week that showed Fox News is the most influential of all the news organizations because its audience has its value system affirmed by watching Fox News. We live in silos now, and we watch what we confirm our worldview. But it is very troubling because it is outrageously and openly a propaganda ministry of truth. And they do any ministry of truth, read George Orwell, as you indicated, and you find that fear and paranoia and concern it will motivate people. And look, Americans are afraid. For the first time in a long time, they think, as I said earlier, that the future is not going to be better than the past. And they're afraid. And they're afraid of our declining status in the world. They're afraid for their children's future. So you come along and you find a devil the other side and you feed it all the time. And that fear turns into anger, which turns into getting out to vote for what confirms your worldview. It's all very much a part of an organic whole. When Hillary Clinton said 15 years ago, there's a vast right-wing conspiracy, she may not have been reporting the present, but she was predicting the future. And we see it now. Yes.
I was wondering, do you believe that if we were to change our electoral process so that literally every vote was counted, maybe through some kind of technological change, biometrics, so that you could go online and vote, open up the political process beyond just two parties, would there still be the same effect of misinformation and swaying people on? If we really got a picture of the entire country and what individuals believed or thought, would there be just total chaos, or would there be eventual, winnowing out of and a rising, of some kind of common goal?
Democracy is, I think, constantly in a state of conflict and chaos. When de Tocqueville got off the boat, having arrived here, the aristocratic Frenchman who came to study our institutions, when he got off the boat in the late 1830s, he was greeted by what he called a tumult. America's always been about tumult. This is the first time in my experience that we haven't been able to have our two political parties at least address some of the major issues despite that tumult. But I don't think we're never going to have a Halcyon society. We're too different. There are too many of us. There are too many value systems in conflict. So I don't think what I'm about to say will solve a lot of problems, but it'll make it better, easier to solve some. We have to have some structural, systemic changes in this country. And you've got a system where the residents, 330,000 residents of Wyoming, have as much representation in the Senate as all of you here in Massachusetts. We have to change the filibuster. We have to change gerrymandering, the drawing of congressional lines, because it makes it possible to isolate the extremes and pit them against each other. It makes it very hard to reach compromise in politics. You go home aroused with red meat for your days. We need to have instant runoff, I think. There are a whole host of systemic and constitutional issues we need to address, but we can't do it in this constant warfare. There's no halftime, no intermission in this warfare between the two parties. Much of it waged, of course, for reasons of power by the right wing, whose only strategy is to say no and keep people angry. So we have to have some structural change. There's a very important book coming out in January by my friend, the
political scientist, historian, and journalist Eric Alderman called Kabuki Democracy. And he said, he goes into detail about why any progressive president, even Franklin Roosevelt, who everybody hoped would be born again in the guise of Barack Obama, that even no progressive president can hope to achieve anything today because of the structural problems in our dysfunctional society. So we've got to address those. Over here.
I'm just curious your opinion, if financial bailouts had not been instituted, would you see just the plutocracy being harmed and brought down, or would it have extended naturally to the national economy and possibly on into the global economy?
Well, I'm not an economist, and I don't know, in particular with a what-if question like that. My friends,
Be a historian.
Hmm?
Be a historian.
my friends in Washington, in New York, who know a lot about finance. I once said to one of them, "What do you think about the market?" And he said, "Well, I'm optimistic." I said, "Why do you look so worried then?" He said, "Because I'm not sure my optimism is justified." But my friends on Wall Street, or the economic journalists, say the bailout was probably absolutely necessary to keep everything from unraveling. But there should have been much stronger consumer protections, much stronger regulations required of the banks when they were bailed out. We're going to get our money back from those bailouts. But the effects of the economic catastrophe in the fall of 2008 on people like Connie Preston and Natalie Ford and millions of others will never be mitigated or ameliorated. Not in my lifetime, at least. So, but as Dick Durbin, Senator Durbin, the number 2 Democrat in the Senate, said on my show about why the financial reform bill wasn't going to had more teeth in it, he said because the banks own the place, meaning they own the Senate. So I think if I had been president, I probably would have had to put together a safe financial system. But I would think, having grown up a New Dealer and having been in the Kennedy Johnson administration, and having some familiarity as a working journalist with these issues, would have asked a lot more of the people we bailed out and put in a lot more safeguards than we got in this present financial reform. There's some good things in it, but not enough teeth. Particularly, we left the 6 big banks too big to fail. And as long as it's too big to fail, the risk factor there is not very great. And we didn't exactly have concession on bonuses and all of that. So I don't know what would have happened if we hadn't done it. I think it would have been terrible. And I actually have some feeling for Obama on this. Obama hasn't surprised me. I mean, I told the young African Americans on our staff in 2008, certainly I wanted to see an African American elected president in my lifetime. When we passed the Civil Rights Act of 1964, late one night, I said to President Johnson, I was there, you think we'll have an African American president in our lifetime? He said, of course not. He said, we'll have a woman president, far blown sooner than we will have an African American president. I wanted to see that happen because that's a great breakthrough in the mindset of a people who've been locked in the legacy of slavery and race and color. And unfortunately, race is unspokenly but powerfully a part of what's going on right now. The right has a stake in defeating the first black president, because if they hadn't gone after him and the bailout had worked, then the Republican history of having been cast into the wilderness after the debacle of 29 and 30 would have come home to haunt them again. Also, because the core of the conservative agenda now is about preserving the white homogeneity of a party that has no other members. And if Obama had succeeded as the first black president, it would have ended that coalition, which began, by the way, when Lyndon Johnson beat Barry Goldwater, and Barry Goldwater opposed the 1964 Civil Rights Act, and the South and all the white conservatives all over the country began to flock to that conservative party. That's a long way from your question about the bailout, but you can see how the mind of an analyst goes. Yes, sir.
Mr. Bosier, my name is Jeff. I can't tell you how much I appreciate and am grateful for your work over the years on PBS, WGBH, where we see you. you're an inspiration, and I could just talk for many minutes on that.
Go
I also,
ahead. Go ahead. I didn't.
you can pay me later. I also admire and am very grateful for the fire that you still are demonstrating and that you can inspire others to have. It's so important, and also our legacy as well. What you have described is a nightmare. And a nightmare in the sense that it doesn't seem real. It's painful. The America that I grew up with, the school kid in the 50s and 60s was the nation of good. The good, idealistic nation that we believed in, pillar of democracy, beacon to the world. It isn't anymore as you described it. Yes, we're a great country, we're great people, but democracy is going down the tubes. And I look at my fellow alumni here. I looked around a few times. I went to graduate school here. I see 300 people in the room, perhaps, many with gray hair, some young folks, many in between. And I wonder if they believe you. And if they believe what you're saying, I believe you. You're not the only journalist, commentator I listen to, Robert Reich and many other folks. I believe what you say is happening. I'm scared. And I wonder about apathy. Apathy. If we're apathetic, if we just think, hey, what the heck can we do? You've outlined a little bit about what you can do. But there are 300-400 people doing something. I wonder if each of us are going to try to do something more. Another step, go to a foreclosure prevention rally that they have, or join some progressive group like Common Cause or one of the others that you mentioned, and take some step.
I hope, if you don't mind my saying so, I hope so. And I guess you put on the mic. I hope so. But I don't have any kind of see as a grand strategy. As far as fear and the nightmare, Paul Krugman says the last sentence in his column today in the New York Times, be very afraid, be very afraid. And Krugman is a much smarter, more knowledgeable man than I am, and he sees things happening out there that I don't understand, but I know I believe him when he does that. I know, people weren't apathetic in 2008. 68 million people turned out to vote, and so many of those young people. So many of them were young people. I remember Obama's speech at the Democratic National Convention in 2004. It was here in Boston, wasn't it? You remember that? How people were stirred. So they aren't apathetic, but many people are not apathetic, but they're very confused and uncertain about what to do. Even David Brooks today has a column about the things people can do out across the country, because when our national political culture is locked, as it is in Washington, when it's paralyzed, you can't really expect to accomplish much in Washington. So there are a lot of things going on here. For example, we did a report on Bill Moyer's Journal about the community organizing in Boston on foreclosure issue. It was so inspiring. Those folks could use Steve, what was his name, Sam? Steve could use some help. He could use some allies out there. There are things to do. I can't tell you what they are. You can find them. And I do hope everybody gets up tomorrow morning and says, I can't alone solve the problem of big money in politics, but I can find some way. And every day, keep it up, because it does, as I say. I used to say to people, if your issue is the environment, if your issue is women's issues, if your issue is gender equality, if your issue is living wage, your second issue should always be the media, because without an informed press, we can't know what's going on. Now I say, as I said a moment ago, whatever your other issues, money in politics needs to be the first issue, because you're going to solve those other things. Now, as to a nightmare, as to people, believe me, I hope people think about the analysis that I did and the facts. We'll publish this on the web on Monday, and you can see the argument I make in the footnotes to almost everything I said.
How about for the
But
tools?
to a considerable degree, we are in denial. I know something about denial. We almost lost our oldest son when he was 30 because we were in denial about his addiction and alcoholism. Never forget the day, we go trouble about it the last month, but I didn't want to believe this about our 30-year-old son, who was a great reporter on Long Island and a good churchman and recently married to a wonderful woman and a good citizen who'd been perfect in high school and college. You know, I couldn't believe this bizarre behavior that he was experiencing. And so I took him to lunch one day and I said, finally got up the nerve to say, let me tell you, are you losing something? And he said, oh no, Dad, I've just got some trouble at home. So I said, let me change the subject. The next day he disappeared. Totally went off the edge. My wife and a friend found him a week later in a crack house and got him out. He went back to recovery, collapsed again. I pulled him out of a crack house. St. Paul, year went by, he crashed again, and I pulled him out with 2 policemen with their guns at the ready from a crack house in Atlanta. And we almost lost him because we had not wanted to believe that what we saw before our eyes was true. And I think that it's hard for us to believe this. Look, we're only 250 years old as a democracy. We're very young. And yet to be in this trouble right now with the deficits, the dysfunctional government. Nobody's talking about the war anymore. Nobody wants to talk to Andrew Bosier today. Nobody wants to talk about, even discuss Iraq or Afghanistan. Well, right now, while we're sitting here comfortable, having a good time, the guys out there in the cold fighting war, they couldn't explain to you why they're fighting it. Even as the president of Afghanistan takes bags of cash from Iran. Doesn't make any sense. But you can't get people to, I don't know what it is. I'm not a psychologist. I wish I were. But I do know that just as the gross national product is important to a country, so is the gross national psychology. And our gross national psychology is really schizophrenic.
Say that.
I used to think that the answer was information. That's why I was a German. More people don't do the right thing. There was a big study out last week, I think, maybe it was Michigan, which got reported, by the way, in the Boston Globe, because that's where I found it online by accident, about how countervailing facts no longer matter. You probably saw the article. That even if people, that if people read something that defies their understanding of the issue, they will believe what they understand to be the issue and not the fact. That's very troubling. It's denial. So I am concerned, and I think the only answer is an aroused citizenry. And I think something like what I was talking about tonight, what Howard would be talking about, which is the larger issue of saving our society for my 5 grandchildren. Look, there are times when I want to give up. I despair. I don't like talking like this. I'd rather come tonight and talk about all those wonderful poets and historians and philosophers that I interviewed over the years.
Yes.
Coming out about them next spring. I would much rather have done that. I don't like this kind of talk.
Thank you for the talk.
Yes.
Mr. Morris, Jeff said he feels that people are apathetic. I feel just the opposite. I think Americans are really engaged today, and they really want to see something better happen in the United States. You're talking about a lot of those issues. But what I find really interesting, I think that what's going on now, it's really indiscriminate. It's not whether it's right or left, or Republican or Democratic or color or whatever. I think there's a collusion of power with the politicians that Eisenhower talked about it with the military industrial complex. It's happening. That has been in place for too long. And I think what we have is power corrupts. I'm really disappointed with our politicians. It seems they lose their soul. And we're trying to find out how to make our country more fiscally responsible. I think that's a right or left or Democratic or Republican position. What's wrong with those ideas?
I agree with you, by the way.
And that's what I think we should have more discussion about those things.
The subject of my conversation.
And I think Howard Zinn, would be very excited about the fact that people are engaging themselves today.
I agree with you, people are engaged. By the way, on just one small measure, applications for the Peace Corps, which I did help to found back in 1960 and 61, are at a record high this year. And I find lots of young people doing it. But Andrew Basievich and I talked earlier today about how do we move the conversation between beyond left and right. We don't have an answer yet. We have some interesting consideration, but that's what we have to do. Because most of the country is not left or right. I'm a progressive. I believe in progressive action. But I grew up being able to talk to conservatives. Now I can't. They don't want to talk. They won't come on my show.
you know, but I do believe in it. Thank you very much. We'll go over here.
Good evening, Mr. Warriors. My name is Patrick, current student at BU. And this weekend is in Washington, D.C. The comedian Jon Stewart is hosting the rally to restore sanity. And I want to ask your opinion, how come we have had to have a comedy show resort to such a serious topic, such as bringing back...
As you continue to focus on the rising and the falling of your breath, feel any stress or tension leaving that part of your body. Feel your hands, your shoulders, your chest, your legs. Tension draining away, leaving you relaxed and refreshed.
Drive reset, baby. What else is going on? Yes. Okay, come on now, Bill.
back the ideals to the media, which was freedom of speech, but at the same time reporting the truth. So I want to know how come we've had to resort to this point so late in the game? Like, what's your opinion on this?
Well, I think that Jon Stewart's secret is the same as Mark Twain. I said when I went on Stewart's show, he was on my first show when we came back with the Journal, and then he asked me to come on his. And I said to him on his show, if Mark Twain were back today, he'd be you. He'd have found a way to move and operate in this medium. And the reason for Mark Twain's enormous popularity and Jon Stewart's is that the truth goes down with humor more quickly and effectively than it does coming from a journalist or a historian or even a teacher. That's something about human nature that will absorb and listen to the truth when it is when there's a twinkle in the eye of the person telling it, and even a joke. You responded more when I told a few little stories than you did any other time. So, I'm an admirer of Stewart because he does an amazing job of analysis. And what is analysis? Analysis is looking at contradictory evidence and trying to interpret the significance of it. And that's what he does every night with these juxtaposition of videos, so that you don't have to say, as I did tonight, Mitch McConnell is a hypocrite. If you just play those two videos, one of which says, well, the sunshine laws will make sure that Citizens United, the Supreme Court decision, that people know who's spending the money, and then the opposition he made, getting every Republican to vote against it. Now, tomorrow's rally is interesting. I mean, I believe in public gatherings. I do. I just love public gatherings. And I think that'll be good. I am an admirer of sanity, and I'm an admirer of Stewart, but we can crack jokes to impotence if we don't take the next step. And the next step is A, to vote on Tuesday, and B, to do what we're talking about tonight. Find some way when you're not voting to remain an engaged, active, participating, and defiant citizen. Yeah.
As a responsible citizen.
I know you recently said that you were quoting something that said that people getting information that is counter to their point of view, people don't change their mind. But I feel like there are a lot of analyses that don't even make it to the public square. I'm, watch Democracy Now! Basically for my news. And when I listen to even NPR, I guess what's particularly disturbing to me right now is that, NPR I find doesn't cover news way and in the depth and with analysis that say something like Democracy Now! Would. Air America was here for a while, and then I'm not quite sure, why that's off the screen, the stations where I feel like you really get analysis, you know, you can't even get them on your dial because they're so weak. So how do you get that, you know, really different analysis into the public
It's hard.
square?
It's very hard. And I find my fault with, obviously, with the mainstream media, the corporate press, is that they don't go where they should go. And my problem with many of my colleagues in public broadcasting is that they cover the news, but they don't uncover the news.
Exactly.
You know, one of my professors at the University of Texas said to me, he was a great journalism teacher, Reddick, and he said to me, news is what people want to keep hidden, everything else is publicity. And that's true. And a student asked the journalist Richard Reeves, a wonderful journalist, what's your definition of real news? And Dick Reeves said, the news that helps us keep our freedoms. And that's news that people don't want exposed. And too few journalists do that. Now the web has opened this up. I think we're entering what really will be a great era of independent journalism. We can find a way to pay them. Because independent journalists don't have to have a filter, an institution, a corporation, Journal GE, which owns it must own the NBC News, or the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, which is a filter between Congress and public broadcasting. On the web, you can find a lot of really interesting and I think honest opinion. Andrew Sullivan on one side, Josh Marshall on another side. And I referred a moment ago to 1840 when there were 1,000 printing presses in this country. They clashed all the time. But they were independent, and you saw them that way. You don't really know what you're seeing when you watch the evening news of the corporate operation. So you have to work at it. This is going to be a golden age of independent journalism through the web, but it means you have to work a lot harder to be well informed. And of course, there's no recipe for easy citizenship. If you do want to be informed, you really can be, but you have to work at it. So you've got to go to many sources, test what they're saying about each other, listen to Democracy Now!, listen to others. I'm like you, I'm a great admirer of Amy Goodman, because I think while she's progressive, she's also very informed and fair, and you know where she's coming from. Yes.
I was recalling a show that you had George Soros on, and he mentioned something to the effect of unfettered capitalism. You know, it's a dangerous thing. And I think about the rollback of the Glass-Steagall Act and many regulations being overturned. And I'd like to get your thoughts about how do, I know you're talking about citizenry being activated, but how do you go against corporate America, Wall Street, and regulations that are supposed to control them are undermined?
It's hard to get those regulations from Congress, as I said earlier, owned by the very people that it's supposed to regulate. And government has been hollowed out and replaced with industry lawyers and lobbyists. And executives from the industry being regulated has happened totally under Bush's administration. So a good thing about the Obama administration that isn't ever written about is that he is replacing a lot of the old George W. Bush bureaucracy with people who are not right-wing, and that's very helpful. I mean, that's the perennial question: how do I signify against the powers that be? And you have to find a way to do that gives you where you are, with who you are. To do that, and join with others. I mean, Common Cause is really, and public citizens really are taking on this Citizens United decision, and they need local constituents, they need contributions, they need an informed laity that's backing you on that. Check them out on the web. But you are more likely to find a way to signify where you live in this town, in your neighborhood, than I can advise you. But there are really ways to do it. We do have to belong to a political party, because that's the whole, that's the tragedy of representative democracy. We're supposed to be able to send our representatives to Washington to exercise their best judgment. But they now have to, as that young man said, that they disillusion us because they can't deliver on their promises because they spend all their time raising money. I'll tell you one very important thing you can do, and this was a disappointment about your state of Massachusetts. I was involved a number of years ago in what's called public campaign. That's an organization set out to sell the idea of public funding for elections. And we did sell it. The organization and citizens sold it in Maine, Massachusetts, Arizona, and Oregon. And what it meant is that if you reach a certain threshold of small contributions, you can get funds from the state that help to a certain level, not extravagantly. You maintain your campaign so that you can run a successful campaign against a millionaire or a billionaire. It's gone very well in Maine, very well in Portland as a city, very well in Arizona, believe it or not, and Connecticut. That was the third. But here in Massachusetts, even though 67% of the people in the referendum approved public funding, the state legislature is almost as corrupt as the Albany legislature or the Austin legislature. I mean, when I was a young reporter on the television station in Austin covering crime, accidents, and car wrecks and all that, I always went up to the Capitol Hill, up to the state legislature, and thought that was the biggest crime scene of all. I mean, but public funding has helped teachers to run for office, labor people to run for office, homemakers to run for office, state legislature, and others. So find out about the public funding. It's called publiccampaign.org. And it's working nationwide. We're going to win that one Monday, not in my lifetime, but it's going to take people like you who get up every morning and try to persuade your neighbors they should help to support public campaign, public funding. Two more questions, and I think we should stop. It's almost 9 o'clock.
Okay.
I'm going to lose my voice.
Very encouraged by your sharing with us the sense of anxiety and denial in the country. There is a scale of denial that has to do with transnational realities that we're not confronting at all, including the fact that water runs downhill and ice melts 32 degrees. And yet every single candidate from the Republican Party seems to be running on the plank that ice doesn't melt, that water doesn't flow downhill, and that carbon in the atmosphere is not a problem. Is there any suggestion you might have to bring us back to some biophysical realities of the way the ecosystem works and what we're up against? Because
No, I don't have an answer. This is really troubling. It's part of what the question earlier. Why would you be pessimistic? You're exactly right about the Republicans. They don't believe in climate. They don't believe science. They don't like science, in no small part because their evangelical and fundamentalist Christian constituency doesn't believe in science. They believe in evolution. And so they're just almost unanimous in denial. I mean, it's astonishing. And I don't know how to convince them otherwise. And it sort of dropped off the map. This is the troubling thing about our dysfunction. You would think that a democracy could find a way to solve the problems we create for ourselves. I mean, we all have waste. So we get together and pay a municipal garbage service to get rid of our waste. You would think a democracy would do that on every issue, but when it comes to global climate change, the anti-scientific bias of the conservative movement is a wall, impenetrable wall there. So it's impossible for beleaguered Democrats, although they have tried, in a political system dominated by money from energy companies that don't want us to diminish our reliance on fossil fuel, to move the ball toward the goalpost. I'm a very dear friend, colleague of Bill McKibben, the great environmental writer who organized thousands of young people around the world in a movement called 350.org. And they showed up at the Copenhagen conference, and I saw a shot of Bill on the news in which his face was crestfallen. He was standing in the corner because he was watching the representatives of the great powers and the lobbyists for the industries quash any effort to be sensible and significant on climate change. Make a note of this. go to 350.org and read it. The most interesting work on climate change is being done by McKibben and a group of young people out of Middlebury, Vermont. Pardon me? No, I'm sorry about that. I mean, anybody under 70. Right.
Well, in a sense, it's giving us another thing to believe in. And if, as one of your former interviewees, Bill Coffin used to say, if you don't stand for something, you can fall for anything.
That's right.
And the problem is that people aren't standing on the scientific information that we now have.
I know.
Thank you.
Yes.
My name is David Rubin. I taught at BU from 1968 through 73 in the English department, and I worked closely with Howard on all kinds of activism that was happening on this campus. And I just wanted to recall very briefly that Howard was arrested here in the George Sherman Union in the spring of 1972, when BU was really a campus in turmoil, had been already for a number of years. I was arrested with him. What happened very, I really have to be careful here. Just time. Was that there had, John Silver, of course, was president. He was for the war. There were efforts to protest military recruitment at BU. There had been a demonstration on Bay State Road earlier in that particular week, in which students had been beaten badly by the Boston Tactical Police Unit, which was a special unit devoted to suppressing civil unrest. And later in the week came an anti-war rally downtown, and that spilled over into a student takeover of administrative offices here in the George Sherman Union. Howard and Roz and my wife Ellie and I and others were at a potluck dinner. We got a call that Howard got a call, I should say, that students had taken over the administrative offices here in the Union, and he was asked to come down and join them, which he did, and I went with him that night. It was a Friday night, and it was an all-night event. We were very concerned about violence, and this is really what I would hope you would be able to comment on a little bit. Howard's amazing commitment to nonviolence. We were very concerned about violence because not only was BU a hotbed of activism, but it was also a heavily infiltrated campus by government agents. There were agents going in and out of the administration building all the time. And what we realized in the course of that long night was that this takeover had also been infiltrated. And there were really provocateurs among the people who had taken over the building. So there were two issues. One was how to make sure that there was no violence committed against the university. And there was a lot of talking down of people who wanted to trash, which was a sort of classic situation, trash the offices. And then as we succeeded in having no damage done, as the night went on, we began to realize we'd be arrested in the morning by the same Boston Tactical Police that had beaten students earlier in the week. And we really were concerned that the provocateurs did not win the day, because they would have wanted that arrest to be violent. And we were very concerned that it would remain a peaceful protest and a nonviolent arrest. And I just remember how what a presence Howard was throughout that night in keeping the big perspective, what we were really.
Well, I think it is true that while violence has
change the world, unfortunately. Men of nonviolence and women of nonviolence, like Gandhi and Martin Luther King, Howard, have had a big impact by remaining committed to non-aggression against even one's adversaries. There's a wonderful woman that we're going to see Wednesday night in New York, Layla Kobe, who led the women in white in Liberia in nonviolent tactics and helped to overthrow Charles Taylor, the dictator. So all I can say is I salute what Howard stands for, and anyone who actually puts his or her body on the line or refuses to ask anybody else to harm anybody else in doing that. Yes. And then we're going to, I think, unfortunately, we have to stop because it's after 9 now, and I have to go to the bathroom.
That really shocked the hell out of me. And it was a poll about the shifts that have occurred this year in political views. And one of the things it said, I believe, was that women, and it might have been women independents, but women have now shifted away from the Democratic Party for the first time since 1982. And in fact, my impression is that women were responsible for both Obama and Clinton getting elected. And my question to you is, how is it now that it appears some of the most prominent women politicians in the country are particularly horrible examples of politicians? What is going on here? I don't understand.
Well, women are different, thank God. But power is gender neutral.
Say that.
And I always said before she was in office that one day we're going to get the first woman president, a woman prime minister of England, and it turned out to be Margaret Thatcher because her belief system, her DNA was different from everybody else. So I mean, I do think women have this nurturing capacity that is very
Not no more.
is very affirming in some politics, but I also think you can have a absolutely despotic woman as well, and that goes to power and ambition, which is, as I said, not gender. It's gender neutral. It can reside. Ambition can reside in anybody, and so can bad taste.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
All right, one more. You're the last.
I have a question related about jobs. What's happening with the jobs? United States government's budget is $14 trillion and unemployment is rising. So what's happening with the jobs?
Well, for one thing, as I indicated earlier, corporations sitting on record profits are not spending their money on infrastructure and innovation and building things that give people jobs. That's a big factor. Most jobs do come from the private sector, including, by the way, small businesses account for more jobs than large businesses, and small businesses are in trouble. I often say, if you want to know the impact of money in politics, look at the shops that are shuttered in your neighborhood. So small businesses are not hiring now, and that's a problem. But the $14 trillion, much of that goes to the interest, which is paid to the financial community and to the people who bought treasuries, and that's not creating per se jobs. We have a sputtering economy, an economy that is not creating new opportunities, moving from creating things to serving things, and that means lower paying jobs. We've got to get a lot of that money, you're right, freed back into supporting innovation. We've got to get the
big corporations investing that cash in people and the future. And we're going through a period in which if we don't come out of it with a lot of innovation, this republic will become a banana republic. And most people will be working week to week for pay instead of a sustained investment. I am losing my voice. I'm sorry about that, but thank you very much.
Very good.
Good evening, everyone. And good evening, those of you who are attending at the Law Auditorium. I'm Jeffrey Henderson, Dean of Arts and Sciences at Boston University, and it is my great privilege and pleasure to welcome our community of faculty, students, alumni, and friends to celebrate and inaugurate the first lecture in our new annual lecture series honoring Howard Zinn, Professor Emeritus of Political Science, who was a member of our faculty from 1964 to 1988. The Zinn lectures will feature speakers who, like Professor Zinn himself, offer provocative commentary on the issues and politics of the day. And our day is a day that leads them no less than any other day I can remember. Howard Zinn's contribution to the Department of Political Science, the university, and the national and political discourse are too many and too well known for me to have to rehearse them here. My own kids discovered Howard Zinn's writings in high school and were very impressed that he taught at the same university I did. So I finally got some respect from them. Professor Zinn has been an inspiration and mentor to many, and we hope that the Zinn lectures will highlight his rich legacy for future generations of Boston University students and the wider community. We owe the inauguration of the Zinn lectures to the vision and financial support of an alumnus, Alex McDonald, CGS class of 70 and Arts and Sciences 2, and his wife, Dr. Maureen Strafford, Medical School, 1976. They created this endowment as their tribute to Howard Zinn and to ensure that his work will be remembered by future generations of students and scholars at Boston University. We hope that the generosity of Alex and Maureen will encourage others to reflect on the influence that Howard Zinn has had in their lives. Alex McDonald is a founding partner of the law firm McDonald, Rothweiler, Eisenberg, a Boston and Philadelphia-based consultancy representing plaintiffs in complex personal injury, medical malpractice, pharmaceutical, and product liability litigation. We have to make sure those stairs are secure over there. His cases include, most notably, the largest wrongful death recovery in the history of Massachusetts in the first fen-phen diet pill death case filed in the United States. Maureen Strafford is a pediatric anesthesiologist at New England Medical Center. They are the proud parents of 2 daughters, and of course we hope that at least one of them will follow in their parents' footsteps by attending Boston University. On behalf of Boston University, the College of Arts and Sciences, and David Mayers, chair of the Department of Political Science, our thanks to Alex McDonald and Dr. Strafford. So I give you Alex McDonald.
Thank you, Dean Henderson, and thank you for all being here. The people in this auditorium with us physically, those who are sitting in the law school auditorium, joining us through the virtual reality of television. It is a great pleasure to call myself the proud son of the class of 72. here at the College of Arts and Sciences, that lucky and charmed generation of students who got to spend 1968 to 1972, certainly among, if not the most politically charged, historically significant, socially oriented 4 years that a young man or woman could imagine spending on campus. But because of the man that we're here to honor tonight, the campus life was not merely the life of the classroom, it was not merely the life of the library. It was, for so many of us, a life that took the lessons of the classroom and applied them in literal senses in the common square of the community, on the streets of the community, in the gathering spots of Boston Common and the ellipse in front of the White House, where we gave our points of view to President Nixon, and around the Washington Monument and so many other places. And that geography had something in common, because wherever people of passion gathered, there was a common thread in the form of a common speaker. Common only in the sense that he was there whenever he was called upon, but uncommon in his zeal and his passion. And that's the man that we're gathering to honor tonight. My hope is that in a real sense, what we will experience over the next couple of hours is Boston University's non-musical version of the climactic scene in Mr. Holland's opus. And Howard and his beloved Roz are great movie fans, and he understands the illusion. The illusion that a great teacher whose life is chronicled over the decades, a man who, as opposed to political science and the world of history, thought that his passions and his contribution as a teacher would lay in the realm of music, only discovers in the later years of his life, at the conclusion of his teaching career, that his masterpiece, his opus, was not the notes in the musical literature, but rather the countless notes in the form of the students that he touched over his decades in the classroom. And what was true for Mr. Holland is particularly true for the man we gather to honor tonight. Now, there are many thanks to be given, and I must say that the dean was generous beyond propriety in the singling Maureen and myself out. We are simply the lucky folks who were in a position to start the fund that gives rise to tonight's celebration. But it's a fund that we hope will be supplemented by other people who've been touched by our guest of honor, by his writings, by his words, by his example. And so that 10 years, and 20 years, and 50 years from now, people will gather in this place on an evening like tonight and be inspired by the example of our honoree. In pulling this together, it would be immodest to suggest that we played any role more than the initial domino in an easy line of dominoes that fell. Because once the idea entered our consciousness to honor our guest of honor, the word went out, and countless other people here at BU and in the greater Boston community joined as well with their time and their passion. Three people need to be singled out, and those are friends of Howard's and Roz, who immediately agreed to supplement David Myers and other members of the political science faculty in comprising the board of advisors, the people who will select each year's speaker. They are in two instances with us tonight, in the flesh and the other by proxy, and I'd like them to stand in a moment when the last name is uttered to receive your welcome. First, these are writers all, men and women of immense talent who know Howard not just professionally, but socially and personally, and love him. We begin with that gifted writer, winner of the Pulitzer Prize, a treasure for all of us in Boston, but a treasure in no small part because her writings have now for decades appeared in over 400 newspapers every week as a gold model of what feminism and rational thought and the good life, measured by values that matter, is all about. Ellen Goodman of the Boston Globe. In each instance, these are people that I am very proud to be able to call friends. But our next member of the committee who's traveled up from New York is a person bonded not only to me, but much more intimately, and much longer period of time, with my wife, Maureen, her high school friend of over 40 years, her Barnard classmate, going back 30 odd years, the head of the English department at Barnard at present, but much more importantly, one of the most elegant, gifted, beautiful writers that our generation has produced. We got through Final Payments, Company of Women, last year's Pearl, a masterpiece, and the just issued The Collected Stories of Mary Gordon. And in the interest of chromosomal diversity, we realized we better have a man join the group as well, but it was not gender bias, it was talent once again that caused the selection. The request was made and instantaneously, as with Ellen, as with Bob, as with Mary, our final member of the Board of Trustees, member of the selection committee, said he would happily be part of this for all the time that may be gifted to him over the decades ahead. And this man has taken ties to Boston University. He was, during my time, the Catholic chaplain over at Newman House. He has gone on from a life of literal spirituality to a much greater, broader, more important, more public spirituality as a writer of incredible insight and moral sensitivity. James Carroll is not with us tonight, but his wife, the equally talented novelist Alexandra Marshall, is. I'd ask all three to stand. Now, some of you may have eclectic tastes in music, as I certainly do. And notwithstanding the Dorchester upbringing, I have a great passion for all kinds of melodies and all kinds of music, save opera, because I'm ignorant. But I do love country western music. And some of you who share that interest and passion may be familiar with a early 70s ballad, a lovely tone poem about heroes, sung by the great, recently deceased Waylon Jennings and his partner in the musical life, Willie Nelson. And the title of that song was My Heroes Have Always Been Cowboys. Well, the problem with the Dorchester upbringing in the late 50s and 1960s is there were so few cowboys for young males or females to
6089.
emulate. And so at 18, traveling on the red line and the green line for the first couple of years of my formal education, I would kind of like Dorchester's answer to Dorothy, come out of the black and white world at one end of the red line, and each morning get deposited near Kenmore Square, walk the yellow brick road to Commonwealth Avenue, and encounter great wizards who have a tremendous impact on one's life. Teachers of all sorts of discipline. But the greatest wizard of all, the greatest teacher, is the man we're going to honor in a few seconds. And so the problem for me, understanding that cowboys were not literal role models, was how would I
6089.
reframe that reframe? And it's really quite simple. From the age of 18 in 1968, up until this moment, It is quite true and candid and easy for me to say, my hero has always been Howard. And for those who know the song, the next
So
lyric
this is
equally
number
appropriate,
3.
and he still is today. I'd ask you to join me in an event that is 84 years in the making. A half a lifetime ago, 42 years ago, our guest of honor began his teaching life at this university. But in looking through his collection of great works that sit in the library at my home the other night, from LaGuardian Congress through the politics of history, up through
She says
seminal work on civil disobedience, a book
2 out of 3
not to
people.
be more timely to our lives today as a culture and as a country. A book written in late 1966, early 1967, appropriately entitled Vietnam, The Logic of Withdrawal. As Howard has often said, it was not a birth control manual.
She
But what it
said
was, for
is
those who are
that
lucky enough to secure a copy today, is the past is prologue. I invite anyone lucky enough to secure
she
a copy.
says 2.
Those pages written 40 years ago to substitute the word Vietnam for Iraq, and you will be bearing witness, as I was reminded
Heart
tonight,
attacks
of
are
prophecy, because everything said in that book about the logic of war from that war applies to the one tragically being waged today. So, looking through those books,
This is
often
that.
suddenly jumped out at me. Something that should have been
right here.
apparent to me wasn't,
3.
and that is, it's somewhat magical that we are gathered here tonight in late 2006, because the guest of honor began his teaching career at Spelman College exactly 50 years ago. So this is a golden anniversary, and this is a night of celebration long overdue. It was 18 years since my professor, or some of you, your professor, graced these halls on a daily basis. But his spirit is still felt. He is a gifted teacher, a prolific historian, and a man who, by his example in words, both spoken and written, have taught this community, this country, and this culture where true north lies in the political constellation. It is my great honor to introduce to you Professor Howard Zinn.
Thank you. Thank you, Alex. Well, not just for that elegant introduction, but for just being responsible for all of this. All of you people are here because of him. In fact, I am here because of him. Yeah, he got this idea.
I want to
And
say.
I thought he had other things to do, but apparently not. Well, it's sort of a teacher's dream, right? That 30 years later, a student shows up.
Wait till the end. It's supposed to be funny.
But this is going too far. I'll accept it anyway. I want to thank him. I want to thank the political science department, you, the mayors, and especially Laura Moore of the political science department, who worked so hard on all of this. I want to thank Karen Fung of Boston University, Dean Henderson. Boston University responded with remarkable enthusiasm. And yeah, I don't know if I will ever get over it.
it's nice to be honored. I admit it. And I'd also like to take the opportunity to honor a man who taught in this building for a very long time, not here, not with us anymore. Probably taught more students at Boston University than anybody, any professor in history at Boston University, who is my closest friend at BU, who walked the picket line with me, who shared with me that little part of the political science department, which we called the incurable ward. Professor Murray Levin. Yeah. Yeah. And the other faculty, some of them were here tonight, who were with us in those days, who formed the union, who, along with the secretaries and the technical workers and the custodians and the librarians, all of us went on strike together in 1979. It was a great moment in the history of Boston University. So I want to thank all of them. Yes. And I want to thank also the students of that time. Some of them are here tonight too. Some of them have come from who knows where to be here. But the students who marched down Commonwealth Avenue in October 1969, Alex was one of them. Marched down Commonwealth Avenue to join 100,000 people on Boston Common to protest the war in Vietnam. And then those students, and I met one of them just a few minutes ago, those students who in the 1980s set up the 10th colony on campus to sort of represent the shanty towns of South Africa to protest apartheid in South Africa. So I want to thank all of these people and Alex and his wife Maureen, both of whom are the key figures in organizing this whole event and making me feel good. So my topic tonight, I pretend that I care what my topic is, but you have to do this. My topic is bringing democracy alive. It's probably my cell phone, somebody telling me, please, no more. You've done enough trouble. My cell phone has the most remarkable music. Yeah. The bringing democracy alive. So I thought, well, maybe just as a first step, we might join the campaign for the impeachment of George Bush and
I'm gonna go to the hub.
and Dick Cheney. The double impeachment. And the Constitution says that you are impeached for high crimes and misdemeanors. They meet the qualification. High crimes, 2 wars in a few years, thousands of young Americans dead, thousands more mutilated coming home, tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of Iraqis dead. Constitution